Hi,
Hi,
Philip.
I'm Philip. Sorry, do you want to do that again?
Hey, Philip. No, thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate it. I know we've been trying to have this meeting for weeks and weeks now, and it just seems to keep bouncing back and forward. But I really appreciate you coming on. It's good to have a property solicitor on to give people some real knowledge about what's going on in the industry.
Thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate that warm welcome.
So why don't you just take the floor for sort of 4 to 5 minutes and just tell us who you are and what you do and what you're all about.
Okay, well, I'm Philip Armstrong. I am the founder of Armstrong Solicitors. It's a law firm, it's a high street law firm. It's based in Newton Abbey, although we have clients from all across Northern Ireland. I would say about 80 to 85% of our work is residential conveyancing, which is essentially the legal bit of people moving house. We probably receive instructions for over 1,000 sales and purchases every year. We have 5 full-time conveyancing solicitors
Mm-hmm.
who specialize in conveyancing and nothing else. And as I say, we actually all work out of one office. So we have all our experience and our expertise in one room, which is fantastic from the point of view of just we always are able to get an answer to a question. We always have. It's a good atmosphere. It's a productive atmosphere, and it's all about property. From my own point of view, I am a member of Council of Law Society of Northern Ireland. I'm a member of Conveyancing and Property Committee of Law Society,
Yeah.
and I'm also a member of the subcommittee of the General Conditions of Sale review, which the General Conditions of Sale are basically the template contract set down by the Law Society under which all residential sales and purchases are supposed to be carried out in
Yeah.
Northern Ireland. The last time that was updated was 2003, from what I can remember. So an update is long overdue, and we've been doing that for the last 18 months. And we're hoping that the new general conditions of sale are going to go live. Well, coronavirus accepted, we were hoping they were probably going to go live at the end of this year. Not sure how that timetable has been impacted, but certainly coronavirus won't change any of the considerations that we were making in terms of the fact that the general conditions are out of date and they need to be sorted. And I must say we've made a fantastic progress. They are pretty much finalised. They do now take much more cognizance of the way conveyancing practice and solicitors practices now work, in terms of when you get title deeds in and the other certificates and searches that you need to be able to progress cases. So as I say, that's all sort of ongoing at the moment, but it does really give me an insight into both the practicalities of owning a large conveyancing practice and the technicalities and the legalities of actually sort of how conveyancing should be running in the background.
Okay, brilliant. And what about the patterns of conveyancing for anybody who's moving house that may listen to this over the next, couple of months? What sort of patterns have you noticed over the last, month or so, and how do you see it going?
Well, that's how long do you have? Um, a month ago, it was sort of business as usual. Obviously, when the lockdown or the stay-at-home period, as it probably should more appropriately be called, come into place, to some extent, the scenery changed overnight. 28th of March, the Northern Ireland Assembly enacted the fabulously named Health Protection Coronavirus Restrictions Regulations Northern Ireland 2020,
Mhm.
which I'm just going to call the regulations now.
Okay.
And essentially, the regulations say that it's not permitted to move house, to physically move house, unless you have a reasonable excuse for doing so. And in case you're wondering what a reasonable excuse is, other reasonable excuses for not staying at home are things like going to funerals, um, providing personal care for vulnerable people, being a member of the NHS, being a frontline worker. So there's actually a very small exception to the general prohibition that you physically should not be moving house during the stay-at-home period. given the fact that we're talking about this, today, 16th of April, the lockdown period has been extended for another 3 weeks. So in theory, the regulation says that we should not be physically moving house until at least the 6th of May, I think that goes up to.
Yes.
Which obviously impacts on a lot of things, and no doubt impacts on what you do as well, Chris.
Well, absolutely. It's really like our income is just completely stopped. The guys are on furlough. I'm obviously keeping busy because as the owner, there's a lot of things that I can be doing in the background, new things I can be learning, new things we can try. But yeah, it has had a huge impact on us. But we're just preparing to come out of it stronger. That's the only thing we can do. There's nothing you can only do what's within your control. I know there's a lot of guys out there still working, maybe doing cash jobs, and they shouldn't be. And people phoning me, and I'm having to turn away business. But look, you've got to go with. Is that a legal obligation, or is that a legal thing now that people actually aren't allowed to move?
But that's a very good point. I think most people don't actually realize that there is now a law that says that essentially you're physically not able to move house. Now, there are other kinds of residential conveyancing that can be completed.
Yeah.
And that's certainly something that people keep asking about. I mean, for example, buy-to-let purchasers, people who are not actually physically moving into a property, in theory, there's no legal reason why they can't do that. There are some operational reasons that I'll maybe come on to, but legally, you're not in breach of the regulations if you purchase property. The issue is the physical act of actually moving because you're not staying at home.
Okay.
I suppose purchasing from estates, people who have passed away,
Yeah.
again, the property is likely to be empty. And again, that would tend to suggest, therefore, that the stay-at-home thing is not going to be
Yeah.
overly breached. Buying a site, I think the big sort of grey area which we are seeing at the moment is new build properties which have completed. Potentially you are not staying at home. People physically will want to move into their new build property.
Yeah.
And I have to say that is a tricky one, because in theory, if you are facilitating that, if you're asking removal men or removal people, I should say, to come and offer a service, if you're basically, inducing people almost to sort of breach their own stay-at-home obligations, then I think that is potentially an issue. I do know that there are new build properties which are completing at the moment and people are moving in. I'm not entirely sure how they're doing that unless their family own a van.
Van hires are still going, so van leasing
Okay.
is still open. So there are people doing it that way.
Yeah, I think it is probably possible to move into a new house and still socially distance to an extent. As I say, I do feel it's tricky. We have certainly we have completed cases during the stay-at-home period. Some of those will be for NHS workers, and other will fall into the reasonable necessity exception to the regulations, where they're in contract and they will be sued if they don't complete the move. Now, I must say the government guidance and the Law Society of Northern Ireland guidance to solicitors says that as much as possible we should cooperate to try to delay completion until after the stay-at-home period is over, and that the government guidance says that as well. There is a bit of a grey area about, if you are in contract and for whatever reason you can't complete or you can't delay the completion date, then to a certain extent, we have to simply do what we can to make sure that you can actually move house. That, I suppose, moves us on to the other issues, which if you're sort of on LinkedIn or you're listening to some of sort of the local radio stuff at the moment, you'll probably hear about issues with both land registry and mortgage lenders.
Yeah.
And I think one is possibly related to the other. Very briefly, land registry is part of the Department for Finance and Personnel. Land registry is basically the public agency where all ownership of land or property in Northern Ireland is registered on the public record. And DFP at the start of this essentially said that land registry was not an essential service, and initially land registry therefore essentially closed and put the shutters down.
Yeah.
To the extent even that if you posted stuff to land registry, it would be received back as return to sender, which is certainly a very odd thing you would expect from a government office. Then, due to representations from the Law Society and a couple of other commercial bodies, Chamber of Commerce and what have you, Land Registry have relaxed that slightly. They have extremely limited functionality in that we can apply for certain things electronically. Those applications, and this is important, those applications will not be processed until Land Registry reopens. Essentially, that means that there is a bit of a gap in terms of what is on the land register now and what will be on it when Land Registry reopens. There may be other things in the queue before us. And from the terms of lenders wanting to make sure that they have the first mortgage on a property, that can cause an issue.
Okay.
So where we are with that at the moment is originally lenders basically said, no, we're not lending anything. We're not any mortgage advances that they had sent to us to complete cases. We actually were asked to return funds back to the lender again, thereby putting the borrower, the client, in breach of contract. So we had some very hairy cases over the last couple of weeks. Now the position is more uncertain. Some lenders have now essentially opened up again and said, look, we think land registry is okay. I personally don't feel that they're reading the practice directions correctly. But what we're now saying, to cut a very long story short, is that most lenders are looking at things on a case-by-case basis. So if we can certify to the lender that their security, their mortgage will be properly registered against the premises, then they're happy to take a view on it. Now, there are some issues with that operationally in terms of what we as solicitors can actually certify when land registry is not fully functional. That is an element. Unfortunately, that is something which is down to the solicitor. And unfortunately, sometimes the expectations being given to the borrower and the expectations that potentially the estate agent or the mortgage advisor or other people in the transaction will have, they tend to actually miss the fact that we will potentially, as solicitors, be sued by a lender if something goes wrong down the line and they're not actually protected as the first legal charge holder. So much as everyone wants to sometimes put their own tuppence worth in, this is ultimately down to the solicitor to make a decision. Am I protecting the lender? Am I protecting myself? And importantly, am I actually protecting the client as well? The client needs to be aware that if they're looking to complete a purchase or a sale during this time, some of the searches will not be up to date, and therefore there is potentially a legal risk to them that their ownership of the property may in some way be affected. I appreciate this is extremely technical, but ultimately that's what people pay their solicitors to look at, the technical stuff. And as much as possible, we try as much as we can to manage people's expectations and to try to get them into the property. Ultimately, Chris, you're in a position, you're in an industry, I'm in an industry where we need to make stuff happen for us to actually make a living. We appreciate that, but we have to do it within the law, and we have to do it within the guidance, and we have to do it within all the regulatory stuff as well, and practically what we can actually do.
Okay. So many people are still, even over the last few weeks, they are completing and they may potentially be in breach of the law down the line whenever land registry reopens. And if there's a backlog of things, is that, so not only are they in breach by social distancing, it could be something that actually is from their property completing and they're not aware of it.
Yeah, there's essentially two issues. There's the immediate sort of question people have to ask themselves, which is, if I am completing within the stay-at-home period, am I breaking the law? And as I say, we're happy to advise clients on the regulations. They can read them themselves. The regulations are online.
Yeah.
If they feel that they're not breaching the regulations by doing that, then that's where they really need to take advice from their own solicitor, saying, okay, what are the risks? What government offices aren't actually open at the moment, and how does that affect me? Some of the court offices aren't open, Chris, which means that, for example, we can't get an up-to-date bankruptcy search, we can't get an up-to-date enforcement of judgment search.
Yeah.
So that might mean that, for example, the vendor, the person selling the property, may have some sort of court actions pending against them, which the purchaser may not know about. Ultimately, that will all come out in the wash, but potentially the purchaser's initial ownership of the property may in some way be prejudiced. So
Okay.
it's not just simply a case of looking at just the law. We need to look at what else isn't quite working in the process, and it's essentially making a judgment call every time.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things for people to be aware of.
Very much so.
Let's say, we're kind of, let's say in 3 weeks, for example, if we get out of lockdown and people are going to start thinking about, and I mean, have you had many requests to complete on like just residentials over the last few weeks, with the exception of, your NHS and a couple of things we spoke about off camera? Or is it all?
Yes, essentially, there's a lot of people who are sensible, and again, people who are probably have maybe been furloughed or have been laid off on their own jobs. They want to pause everything, and you would expect that, and that's probably quite a prudent thing to do. Ultimately, this comes down to people who are in contract and people who are not yet in contract. The people who are in contract really have made a commitment. Now, if their mortgage company decides to pull everything, well then there's not a lot anyone can do, and you would hope that the seller would just take a view on it and everyone walks away. It may well be that we want to delay completion until after the stay-at-home period. After the stay-at-home period, land registry will reopen, will become fully operational. That will hopefully give the lenders the confidence that the mortgage lenders need to be able to lend freely again, and hopefully the wheels would maybe start to turn again. Yes, we are getting new cases in. They're not a huge amount. There is still interest. People still want to move house. I think as well, if you spend potentially 6 or 7 weeks in a relatively small property, or a property where there's a lot of people, it may well be that by the end of the period you're absolutely sick to death of the property and you want to move anyway.
Yeah.
So that actually might help the market just sort of reinitialize a bit. So that's something to look at. People do still want to get into some sort of a binding contract. Now, we do, based on the guidance, both by Law Society and by the government, we are trying to avoid people getting into contract, or if they feel that they absolutely have to get in contract, then we try to put in as many special conditions as we possibly can to try to account somehow, to try to account for the madness that is going on at the moment and may still go on for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Horribly, potentially even months.
Yeah. Sorry, you cut off there for a second. Even myself, I wasn't aware that there was so many wheels turning in the background in terms of the actual legal side of things. I think a lot of people are unaware of the amount of stress that each industry is under in terms of this whole process. The removals, but especially the solicitors, and then of course the estate agents, who are all everybody's trying to work in sync to make everything happen and make everything as stress-free as possible. But
yeah, that's entirely right. I mean, I suppose, everyone in the transaction, the estate agent, the mortgage advisor, the surveyor, the valuer, the remover, the solicitor, everyone has their role to do. And I suppose everyone has a view on how quickly those roles should be undertaken and done. The legal process, it is complicated. Northern Ireland law, and certainly the conveyancing especially, is still very paper-based, whereas ultimately in the rest of Great Britain, it's much more electronic, and you can do a lot more things remotely. In Northern Ireland, we're still paper-based, we're still very deeds-based, which essentially means we need to be in a physical location, we need to be getting deeds to that physical location, and we need to be sending them out to another physical location as well. One thing I would say, I think there will be a new normal. We're certainly going to change the way that we do conveyancing in our office. At the back of all this, we have our own conveyancing web app. We think it's the only one in Northern Ireland. where clients are able to log in, see exactly what's going on in their case, and the other stakeholders in the case, estate agents, mortgage advisors, will get real-time updates on what's happening. We're now starting to do virtual meetings because of social distancing. We're looking at virtual meetings. We've done some of those, and we're going to incorporate a lot more of that into our web app going forward. So the client really can go to one place and do a huge amount of the stuff. Ultimately, it's about the experience of moving house. And unfortunately, the legal process is the bit that it's not overly transparent. It's not that easy to understand. Hopefully your solicitor will advise you on a step-by-step basis exactly what's happening and what the permutations are. We find that, and this is no reflection on any other firm, but obviously, if you have a problem with something inside your head, you don't go to the GP, you go to a brain specialist, a brain surgeon. People who want to move house need to go to a specialist who does 1,000 transactions a year, who sees every sort of case, who sees every sort of circumstance, because we can advise based on that. And I say it's handy as well, just for us, because I'm doing the stuff with Law Society as well. I do have an insight into what happens, and it means then that I can just hopefully improve the client experience and hopefully the experience of estate agents and mortgage advisors and other people involved in the transaction as we go along.
Yeah, and moving house for a lot of people is a very negative experience. Lots of information and surveys across the internet have classed it as one of the most top 3 stressful things people will ever go through. Number one, I think, is divorce. I'm pretty sure planning a wedding is one of the top 5 things as well. But most people do class it as a very, very negative experience. And what you said there about taking the client through step by step, and it really reassures them. And I found a lot of the times that I feel like I spend a lot of my time reassuring people everything's going to be okay and everything's going to go ahead and everything, people are going to show up. But one thing that really helps is when I take them through the process of the actual moving day. This is what time you show up. 12 o'clock is when you have to hand your keys in. Usually there's a little bit of time between 12 and 2 where funds are getting swapped over, and then after that the keys get released, pick them up, and then we unload. And just when they know that step-by-step process in their head throughout the day, it makes them feel a lot better. But it tends, just from what I see, it tends to be a very negative experience for people, and my job is kind of to make it as positive as possible, because when moving day comes around and there's kids and there's other things about, it can be very hard for people if things aren't.
That's a very good point. And actually, do you know what? I mean, we were talking about the experience at the moment, which is just completely unreal. But if we talk about the normal moving house experience, the day of completion, you have an idea as to how you, as the remover, are going to sort of deal with that day. And unfortunately, we can't even give any particular certainty as to when things will happen on the day of completion. Part of that is actually, believe it or not, down to the Northern Ireland banking system, because when we send funds electronically on the morning of completion, we have no guarantee that they will actually hit the receiving bank, the seller's solicitor's bank, anytime really up to 4 o'clock that afternoon. Whereas if we actually complete the case the old-fashioned way, by check, normally we can complete the case by about 10 o'clock in the morning, and everything then falls into place. Now, this is something which is an ongoing debate, and I've talked about it on LinkedIn quite frequently, and I will do so again. But as I say, it's funny just to be able to plan the day. The thing that you would think would be the more modern way of transferring funds electronically actually makes the day more uncertain, because we've no idea when the funds are going to arrive. If there's a chain, I mean, you'd mentioned just before we come on to record here that you were starting one of your calls at sort of 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Potentially that happens because funds are not received until that time.
What I seem to find is if people are in chains, this is just a pattern I've noticed. I don't know if this is maybe it's just a coincidence, but I seem to find that if people haven't got out of their house by 12 o'clock, as it's stated, they need to hand their old keys in by, I think it's usually 12 or 1. Is that right?
The idea is that in theory you throw your keys in at 12 and the new person picks them up at 2. Doesn't generally work like that, but that's the idea anyway.
So that's kind of well, what was one? I had a point there to make. I can't remember exactly what it was. But when they hand their keys in, there's a lot of uncertainty in that 2 hours for them between getting their new keys. And then what I seem to find is that when people get to the afternoon stage, and if we get to the new house and the other people haven't got out of their house yet, that will cause a huge delay. And then all of a sudden you're waiting till sometimes 5 and even 6 o'clock for keys, and people are getting very frustrated because at that point, you know, they might even be getting charged more, even though it's something that's out of their control.
100%, and we do get this. If it's a chain and someone wants electronic funds, you just know it's going to be a disaster, because it's, you know, the person at the end of the chain may not even get their funds on the day of completion. They may get them after hours, or they may not get them at all, and then suddenly someone is going to be homeless, or starting to run around trying to negotiate caretakers agreements and things like that. I mean, we have estate agents who are literally handing keys over at 7 o'clock on a Friday night, and they've been decent enough to actually, run round to the house and hand them in. Other ones have simply just closed, and somebody at the end of the chain is homeless. So, as I say, chains for conveyancing where there's electronic transmitting of funds on the day of completion is fraught with difficulties, and weirdly, checks are actually much easier, and a check on a solicitor's client account should actually not be a problem, and generally seen as clear. It is normally, and technically not, it's normally treated as cleared funds, and it's fine.
Yeah. It's a very, very tough one for people when that happens. I mean, it hasn't happened to us for the point that they don't get their keys, and maybe we'll have to take the stuff back and put it in storage. We've never reached that stage, but
Wow.
that's a big one for people as well. I think I read of a company over in, I think it was Bristol. You know, the move was due to cost about 700 quid or something, you know, for the day and the men or whatever it was. There was a bit of a delay with the keys. I think the couple received them at about 4:30 p.m. So it wasn't a crazy time or anything. But the company said, we shut at 5. We're not working on to, you know, 9 o'clock or whatever it might be. And we shut at 5. We're going to have to take your stuff to storage, store it overnight, and then come back a couple of days later and take it out for you. And then they hit the bill. It was like $3.5 grand. Insane.
Yeah, it's we do. It generally doesn't go that far, Chris, as you've said yourself. But there are certainly cases where at the very last minute, you know, the solicitors have had to get their heads together and sort something. And a lot of these issues are avoidable. I suppose the one issue is developers on new build properties always want funds paid electronically. So if they're the ones at the end of the chain, then everyone else in the chain has to pay electronically. And as I say, normally in Northern Ireland, we would say that any more than 2 transactions with electronic funds, unless it's at the same bank, it just simply doesn't work, because first set of funds might be received by sort of 12 or 1 in the afternoon, and the next set won't be received until possibly after 4 or even up to 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
In Northern Ireland, after 4 o'clock, there's a cut-off, and you can't actually telegraphically transfer funds the same day. So really, we've got until sort of from 9 until 4 to get things sorted. And even from a practical point of view, from removals, that's pretty much impossible, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, most of the time, yeah. But once people get the keys, I mean, we have a process in place. You know, we sort of give people from 8 until 6. So usually, if they get their keys, even if it's around 3, half 3, my team are happy enough usually to work a bit later. I'll always inform them if there could be a potential delay, who can work later and who can't. And if it does go over that, then we only charge cost for labour if it goes over that, just to give people a bit of a just so they know it's not going to cost them a fortune, because that's the big
that's very reassuring, actually, because I mean, we've talked about the sort of the stress of conveyancing and the stress of moving house, and I must say, even from having moved house ourselves 18 months ago, it is a ridiculously stressful time, and on the day of completion itself, it's a very stressful time, because you don't just know exactly what time things are going to complete.
Yeah, Normally, I usually find that bringing some buns for people in the morning is usually quite a good start to the week. That's
Chris,
always.
I wish you'd been I wish you'd been my remover 18 months ago.
You didn't know about us then. No, but
No, I didn't. That's true.
it is those little things that we can do. You know, my guys are all really friendly. They're all good fun, and just coming in with a smile, it sets the tone for the day. And just coming in, even something like that, you know, coming in with a coffee and you know, even a box of celebrations. The people are just they're very warm to you straight away, but we just like to usually get in and get cracking, because the quicker we get people out, then we'll have a bit of time maybe in the morning between 12 and 2 to have lunch and get ourselves prepared for the other side.
Yeah.
Uh, People see, whenever you get people out on time, and it means that if we get them out before 12, then they know the process is going according to plan, and that for people is a huge lift when they know things are happening.
Yeah, definitely, 100%.
So, what if people are listening to this and they are moving house in Northern Ireland, over the next, are they planning on moving house over the next 3 to 4 months? What would be the piece of advice that you would give them for right now?
Gosh, I think the one piece of advice has to be, well, I'm going to allow myself two. The first piece of advice is be flexible. And the second piece of advice is take advice from your solicitor. Um, Flexibility is going to be key, because even we as business owners, we simply don't know what the next couple of months are going to bring. I mean, you and I, Chris, as both working in the property industry, are hoping that we're going to come back. Social distancing to some extent is going to be lessened, and you know, the house moving will hopefully start again. People will want to sign contracts. People will want to move in over the rest of the summer,
Yeah,
and that'll be great. But flexibility will be key, because land registry, the other court offices, the lenders, everyone is going to have a backlog to work through. Um, and therefore, because conveyancing, the moving house process is ultimately and primarily a legal process, the only person who really can control the transaction, and really the person that you need to take guidance from if you're a purchaser or a seller, is the solicitor. And I suppose that would be my overriding piece of advice. You know, we do this stuff day in, day out, even on holidays. Most of us actually end up thinking about it. We certainly, as a firm, are modern. We want to make the experience better. But, you know, we also want to get people into their dream houses. So if we can't do that for some reason, then there is a very good reason. And as I say, we do hope that when people pay us our fees to actually advise them, they take the advice. And I suppose flexibility and take professional advice are the two watchwords for the next couple of months anyway.
yeah. Flexibility, just as you said there. I mean, I am becoming a lot more flexible with my terms in terms of completion dates, as we spoke about. But I think it's going to be so important for people to realise that I think everybody needs to be flexible and not get charged for things that are out of their control, because it is going to be there is going to be a lot of changes, like you say, with backlogs, delays, and that sort of stuff. So it's going to be interesting to see how it goes. But I think every company who is involved in that process, estate agents, solicitors, removers, are all going to have to work in sync and really
Very much so.
go as well.
Well, I mean, I'm sort of, there's a bit of me that's hoping that really from sort of day one of coming back, you know, we are going to be starting to look at setting things up, because, you know, even though our physical office is closed, we're still open for business. People can still go to our website, they can get a fee quotation, they can instruct us online. We're still phoning people by return. We're, you know, taking their instructions, and we're pushing their cases forward as far as we can, up to the point that, you know, the guidance is we shouldn't really be getting them into contract. But in terms of sorting out any of the title issues or any of the legal issues, you know, we're looking at all of that. So we're hoping that, you know, when we do go back to some level of new normality, you know, things will hopefully start moving slowly at first, but things will start moving. And as I say, hopefully we will get back into some sort of normality where we have a good housing market, which is obviously a factor in Northern Ireland generally.
Yeah, brilliant. So the last question that I have for you is 15% of people stay and listen to the end of a podcast. So what would be your advice for those 15% that actually stay and listen?
I wish you'd given me that question in advance. Well, do you know what? If the 15% who are listening are still thinking about moving house, um, from what we've seen and what I've read and what I've heard, most people who want to move house, 75% of people who wanted to move house at the start of the year still want to move house, and they're doing their best to get their ducks in a row. They're still speaking to their solicitor, they're still speaking to estate agents, they're still looking at mortgages. I presume, Chris, they're still talking to you as well. I have no doubt people in Northern Ireland and the UK and Ireland generally, people want to own their own homes. And that's not going to change. I think after a period of staying in their present home and possibly living on top of each other, I am absolutely sure that people are going to want to move home. As I say, even though we are obviously reduced functionality at the moment, we're still open for business, as are you. And when those 15% are ready to move house, we're 100% ready for them.
Brilliant. Happy days. Thank you very much, Philip.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.